We are learning Chelek Yud Zayin, Parshas Metzora, first Sicha, and we're using the Lashon Kodesh version of the Sicha, which is available on the website of Project Likutei Sichos. Min apasuk v'lokach hakein midam ha'osh menos nakein al knuch eisen hamitar v'gemer. The Torah describes how the Kain is metaher Metzora. So the Torah says that the Kain needs to take from the blood of the Osham and place it on the Tnuch Eisen HaMitaher, on the Tnuch of the ear of the Mitaher, of the person who is becoming Toher, the Metzora. Hertig Rashi is Tebas Tnuch. Rashi takes the word Tnuch from the Pasuk and makes the Dibra Maskel, Upiresh, and he explains. What is Tnuch? Says Rashi, Geder em Tzoi Sheba Eisen. The middle piece in the ear, which is called in English tragus, and this tnuch, says Rashi, Lashon tnuch le'neidali, this is unknown to me, hasn't become known to me. Va'peisrim keirim le'tendrus, and the peisrim call it tendrus. The peisrim are those the interpreters of Torah. We'll address that later in the Sicha. They call it tendrus. That is the Rashi on this pasuk. And we have to understand. Granted, the word tnuch is an unusual word in Torah. But on the other hand, it's not the first time we find this word in Chumash. It is already found earlier, first in just one pasha before, in Pashas Tzav, and really already earlier in Pashas Tzav. We say more than that. The Pashas Tzav, Pirish Rashi Tevazu. When we open up a Chumash and we go back in Pashas Tzav, Perek Chav Tes, Pasuk Chav, Rashi over there actually already explained what the word Tnuch means. Over there he says like this: Tnuch, hu has chus ha'emtzoi shebetoicha eisen. That's the middle cartilage which is on the inside of the ear, shekeirin tendrus, which is called tendrus. That's how Rashi explains it back in Pashas Tzav. Ve'im kein me'achal sherashi kvash kosu pirish tevas tnuch le'el. Considering that Rashi already explained the word tnuch earlier in Pashas Tzav, madua hu tzarich lachzor al perushe kan? Why does Rashi need to explain it again in this week's Parsha? And we know that usually Rashi relies on Perushim that he explained earlier on the Chumash, especially when it is just an explanation of a word. So once the Ben Chamish Lemikra knows what this word means, there's no need to explain it again. And on the other hand, if for whatever reason Rashi cannot rely in this instant on what he already explained in Pashas Tzav, and there is a need to explain it once again, when it's mentioned again in Pasuk, then Rashi should have already explained it another time in Pashas Tzav. So he explained in Pashas Tzav. The next time it's mentioned in Chumash in Pashas Tzav, Rashi doesn't explain it. Comes Pashas Shmini, he explains it again. So really, he shouldn't need to explain it all together again once he explained in Pashas Tzav. But if he does, then he should have explained it again in Pashas Tzav as well, and not waited till Pashas Shmini. We should be able to explain it as follows. Shom b'Pashas Tzav higdim Rashi b'tchilas inyan kol ha'inyan hazeh the Pashas hamiluim perash b'Vatat Tzav. Let's explain the context. In Pashas Tzav, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu how to inaugurate the Mishkan, the Shivas Yemei HaMiluim, the order of things, the various karbonis that need to be brought, including also putting from the blood of the karbonis on the Tnuch of Aaron and his sons. And when it comes to Pashas Tzav records when it actually happens. How the Yidden, Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron and the sons of Aaron and Bnei Israel actually inaugurated the Mishkan, and part of the telling the story, the Torah tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu put from the blood on the tnuch of Aaron and his sons, and also the thumbs that we're going to talk about later on. So when Rashi starts explaining in Pashas Tzav the Chanukas HaMishkan, the Shivas Yemei HaMiluim, says Rashi as an introduction that all of this of Pashas Miluim I already explained in Pashas Tzav. So therefore there's no need to explain again the word tnuch either. Once it was explained already in Pashas Tzav, and Rashi is referring to that in the beginning of the retelling of the story in Pashas Tzav. So Rashi has no need to explain again the word tnuch either, just like he's not explaining everything else either once again. But in this week's Pasha, but in this week's Pasha, where the word tnuch is in a totally different context, in the context of a Metzora, here Rashi feels the need to explain it again. But that still doesn't really explain it. It is clear when we look at the Rashi over here that Rashi's intention here isn't just to explain the word and the meaning of the word tnuch again, like he explained it already in Pashas Tzav. How do we know that it's not the same? Shaharei, we observe the following. In addition to the questions, what would be the need to explain it again? He already explained it. He already asked that question. And even if for some reason there is a need for it, Rashi doesn't have to go into the details. He could have just briefly explained it again. He could have said, the middle piece in the ear. Just like in the same pasuk afterwards, that it says the word boyen. Boyen means the thumb. Over there in Pashas Tzav, when the word boyen was mentioned the first time, Rashi explains it is referring to the thumb and the middle section of the thumb. Because of gudol. And in this week's Pasha, Rashi he repeats the concept, but he doesn't get into the details. He just says that boyen means gudol, the thumb. So likewise here, Rashi could have just briefly repeated the pirush that it means tnuch, perekoim tzoi sheboizen, gedrem tzoi sheboizen. The perishe kan, hoisiv Rashi, v'shino mi perushe bepashas Tzav. In addition to that, Rashi, besides for these questions, Rashi also adds on and changes from the way he explained it into Tzav. How so? Shekosav, he writes Aleph, v'loshin tnuch le'neidali. He writes that the loshin tnuch is not known to me. He doesn't write that in Pashas Tzav. Beis, he writes also, the poisrim call it tendrous. And in Pashas Tzav, Rashi doesn't write that. Pashas Tzav, he just writes that shekoirim tendrous. It's called tendrous. He doesn't write the poisrim call it tendrous. So this compels us to understand that Rashi's intention here is to explain a new concept in the word tnuch, and the understanding of that is necessary dafke in this week's pasha. We also have to understand Aleph, Maya Kabon v'divrei Rashi loshen tnuch le'neidali. When Rashi says that the loshen tnuch has not become known to me, what does he mean by that? If Rashi's intention is to tell us that the word tnuch does not have in it the meaning of Gederem Zoyshe Ba'oizen. But still, that's what it means. There are many names of things in the Torah that there is no obvious connection between the thing, the name, and the name. The name is describing something, but we don't see necessarily where the connection is between the name, and it seems just that's what it's called, and that's what it's called. And we don't see that Rashi should, in all those cases, make that observation that how the name is connected to the thing, I don't know. Rashi doesn't bother with that. That's just the language. That's what the word means, and that's it. Even in this week's in this same pasuk, Tevas boihen pirish Rashi gudol. Rashi explains that the word boihen means gudol, the thumb. Rashi doesn't write that the word boihen is not known to me. Although he doesn't explain how does the word boihen mean gudol. Rashi just tells us this is what it means. That's what it is. So why, when it comes to Tanuch, does Rashi need to bother telling us this? Besides for what is he bichlal want with it, also the way he says it, this is a very unusual terminology in Rashi. In numerous places in Chumash, when Rashi says that he doesn't know something in Pshat of the Pasuk, Rashi always says lo yodaiti or some similar wording. Lo noidali is not that I don't know; it hasn't become known to me. Is an unusual terminology that we don't find in Chumash, in Rashi. When Rashi says that the Poisrim, the interpreters, call it tendrus, what does Rashi mean? That this is the translation of the word tnuch. Now, if that's what Rashi means, why is he saying hapoisim koirim loy tendrus, which is again terminology that Rashi does not use anywhere else in Chumash? Rather, in Kenho Yatzarich Lema Kedarke Beperusha, Rashi should have said, like he always does, Ubelaz Koirim Loy Tendrus, Oy Tendrus Belaz. That in other languages it's called tendrus. Why does he say the Poisrim call it tendrus, which is not the style of Rashi in Chumash anywhere else? Now, one might think that Rashi is saying about Poisrim Kairim Letendrus because Rashi did not know how this word is translated into other languages. So Rashi say, I don't know what it means in other languages, but I found some other mefarshim who explain it to mean tendrus. So the Rebbe negates that idea in the brackets. It is difficult to say that this word, out of all other words in Chumash that Rashi translates, Rashi didn't know on his own what is the translation of the word tnuch. And he needed the help of the poisrim, so to speak, to tell him or refer to them that they translated as tendrus. Even if we'll find some type of explanation why Rashi doesn't use the usual terminology balaz like he uses all over Chumash, still, why would he use this very unusual terminology? That the poisrim refer to it as tendrus. Poisrim means interpreters. Rashi could have used a more common term that Rashi employs in other places as well. Al derech lashon Rashi, similar to what Rashi uses sometimes. Menachem ben Sruk pireshai or chibroi v'chulu. The medaktikim, they explain it to mean this or that. So Rashi refers sometimes to Rabbi Shadashin or to Rabbi Menachem ben Sruk, and Rashi will use the term pirshai. He explained it, or chibroi, he connected it or explained it. Poisrim, why does he use this term, poisrim, which Rashi does not usually use? V'habir b'cholze. Explanation is as follows. Kavonas libre Rashi kan loshin tnuch le'neidali. He shall be pshute shel mikre dark shel pirushash b'teira tzarich lishlei as pirush hateras keanim alasad. Rashi is coming to negate the pirush of teras keanim on this pasuk. Asher al piv muvenes hashayches ben tnuch legedro emtzoi k'del kamon sifei. The teras keanim actually does explain how the word tnuch implies, or how in that word we have an implication and the meaning of the Gedra Imtzoi Sheba'ozen, that part of the ear. The Rebbe is going to quote the Teras Keanim in Sifhei, but I think it makes it easier to understand if we just briefly say what the Teras Keanim says. We'll read it in the Sicha afterwards. In Teras Keanim it says that the word Tnuch really has two words in it, toich and nuch. Toich means the inside, and nuch means the top. So the Teras Keanim says, toich, you think that you're going to put it into the ear? So no, it says noich. And noich means the top of the ear. The top of the ear, you might think the helix of the ear, like the top part of the ear. So it says, no, it says toich on the inside. So which can have both, the toich and the noich? That is the middle part, which on the one hand, it's like goes to the inside. On the other hand, it's not the inside, it's on the top of it. So the Teras Keanim explains how the word tnuch actually has in it the meaning of the middle part of the ear, that Gedro Emtzoi, which is called in English the tragus. And the Rebbe says here, let's get back here to the beginning of Sif Daled, that Rashi, his whole pirush on this word tnuch in our pasha is to negate that pirush of the Teras Keanim. Me'acha shebir zeh shel Teras Keanim eina al pi pshuta shel mikra, due to the fact that the Teras Keanim's pirush does not fit with pshuta shel mikra. Al kein sheile loy Rashi be'omre v'loshet tnuch le'neidali. So Rashi negates that pshat of the Teras Keanim by writing that the loshen tnuch, the wording tnuch, is something that is not known to me, that it should mean that. But I'm just telling you that it means that. In other words, although the Teras Keanim does explain how that word implies that part of the ear, Rashi doesn't accept that. Now, all over Chumash, there are many words in Torah that Rashi explains, and Rashi does not usually bother negating all kinds of midrashim or all kinds of other biurim from that the other mefarshim of Torah explain. So why should Rashi feel the need here suddenly to negate it? Also, why does he negate it? So we're going to get to that later on. So the reason why Rashi has this need to negate the pirush of Teras Keanim, after darke eino lishle perushim, although Rashi's derech is not usually to negate other perushim, rather Rashi usually always begins right away to explain the pshuta shel mikra as is, without addressing how halacha and medrash and other styles of explaining the psukim view the pasuk. The reason why this is different is because many of the Perushe Rashi in this week's Pasha, and really in Sefer Vayikra in general, but specifically in this week's Pasha, Mekeiram b'Teras Kanim. They are sourced in Teras Kanim. Rashi atzmai bekama mehem, as Rashi himself refers to in numerous Rashis in these Parshas, that this is explained further in Teras Kanim. But Seirim is more than that. But Pasuk HaKoidim, in the very Pasuk, right before this Pasuk, Hevi Rashi has Cholosah Shel Pirusha Miteras Kanim. Rashi brings the beginning of a Pirush from Teras Kanim, Vesiem, and then Rashi does not quote the whole Teras Kanim in that Pasuk. Rather, he just concludes, V'chulu b'Teras Kanim, and so on, as you can look it up in Teras Kanim. In other words, looking Teras Kanim, and over there you'll see the continuation of what I'm writing here. Now, this Rashi wrote one pasuk before this pasuk. So, if that is what Rashi just told us in the previous pasuk, to look up in Teras Kanim for the continuation of what he started, so if the learner will see that where does Rashi take it from, that Tanuch means the Gedrim Tzoshe Ba'izn, he takes it apparently from the Teras Kanim. So therefore the learner might then think that the explanation for why Tanuch refers to that Gedrim Tzoshe Ba'izn is also due to what the Teras Kanim explains. So to make sure that we should not think that way, Rashi right away says, but why Tanuch means Gedrim Tzoshe Ba'izn is not known to me. To clarify and to ensure that we should not think that Rashi accepts in Pshuta Shel Mikra the meaning of the explanation of the Teras Kanim, as the Rabbi is going to explain further on in the Sicha. And based on this understanding, two of the questions that we have raised before fall off right away. Aleph Signin Rashi Loshen Tnuch Neidali. He said that Rashi says Loshen Tnuch is not known to me, which we have asked, that's like a strange wording, not Lo Yodati or something like that. And Beis Hatam Shele Kosov says Parshas Tetzaveh, and also why didn't he write that in Parshas Tetzaveh? Because Ein Rashi Yochel Leima Beloshen Tnuch Lo Yodati. Rashi can't use the usual terminology. I don't know the word Tnuch. Sharehu Yodeya Pirush Loshen Tnuch. Pirush Teras Kanim. He does know a certain Pirush how Tnuch means the Gedrim Tzoshe Ba'izn. Rashi is aware of what the Teras Kanim explains, so he can't say, I don't know. He does know. Nevertheless, Rashi says that this Pirush has not become known, meaning in the sense of Ein HaKoraboy. Rashi doesn't acknowledge it. That Rashi doesn't accept it. Kepirush Mekubal Umasim as an acceptable Pirush that he can incorporate in Pirush Rashi. Li, Rashi says, Leneida li. For me, this is not acceptable. Meaning, because I, Rashi, took it upon myself to explain the Psukim based on Pshuta Shel Mikra and Pshuta Shel Mikra exclusively, without incorporating any other styles of explaining the Psukim. Rashi is very faithful to the derech of Pshuta Shel Mikra. It's Loi Neida Li. For me, for my style of Pirush on Chumash, the Pirush of Teras Kanim is not acceptable to me. So Yodati, Rashi can't say Lo Yodati, I don't know. He does know what the Teras Kanim explains, how Tnuch means the Gedrim Tzoshe Ba'izn. However, Lo Neida Li, it's not acceptable for me to incorporate that Pirush into my Pirush on Chumash. And that explains why Rashi adds on these words only in this week's Pasha, and not the first time he explained the word Tnuch in Parshas Tetzaveh. In addition to the general fact that Rashi's Inyan is not to negate other Perushim, including Perushim of Chazal that come from the Chelek Halacha of Torah, but different it is in our Pasha, as we just explained, because Rashi himself keeps on referring to Teres Kanim, and in the very pasuk right before this pasuk, the Rashi sends the learner to Teres Kanim to see the follow-up of his pirush, and therefore you might see also what it says on this pirush right after the next pasuk, and you might think that Rashi learns Pshat the same way. That's what compels Rashi, and that's why Rashi in this case has a need to negate a pirush, although normally he doesn't negate Perushim. Mashenki Pashtet Tzava, Rashi didn't have that need altogether. But also, in addition to that, also over there, we don't even find anywhere that somebody should explain it. The Mechilta, which is the Tanoim's Pirush on Sefer Shmois, doesn't explain over there Tnuch to mean Toich and Nuch, as the Teras Kanim explains here in Pasha Shmini. So therefore, in Pasha Tetzave, Rashi doesn't have the need to negate it. And in this week's Pasha, he does. So what does the Teras Kanim say, and why is it not acceptable in Pirush Rashi? Sifhei, the Teras Kanim kan iso, Yochol al Toich v'adai. You might think that the Kohen needs that the Moshe needs to put that the Kohen needs to put the blood on the inside of the ear mamish. Talmud Leimar al noich. Therefore, the pasuk says noich. I al noich. If it means noich, noich meaning the top part. We're going to soon see why. Yochel al geiva shaloizen. So you might think that it's referring to the helix of the ear, the top part on the top of the ear, which actually Targum Onkelos translates it to mean that. Talmud Leimar Toich. Therefore, it says Toich. Talmud Leimar Toich Noich. Inside of the Noich. So which one is it? Hokeitzad. Says the Teras Kanim Zegedrohem Tzoi. It's the middle piece that sticks out and covers the opening to the ear. Ubebir Kavanas HaTeras Kanim Kosu Mefarshim. So the Mefarshim explain numerous mefarshim which are referred to in the footnote. They explain that the Teras Kanim intention is to explain that the word tnuch isn't just some random word that refers to this part, rather that the word tnuch has meaning and is made up of two words, so to speak. It's referring to Lashon Toich, the inside, which means Chelek HaPnimi, the inner part. So why is there a nun? If it means Toich, it should say Toich. The additional nun, he al derech harbe tevis b'Lashon HaKedesh. We find many words in Lashon Kedesh. Shenichtavis leitim b'tisefes nun uleitim lelei nun. There are many words that sometimes are written with a nun and sometimes without a nun. For example, we're going to see later on in the Sicha the word anofa, which comes from Lashon af, anger, but it's written sometimes without a nun and sometimes with a nun. We're going to see that later in the Sicha. And miloshen noch, it also means from the word noch, choimas anoch, like it says in Amos, choimas anoch, which is like the wall, and it has an anoch on it. Anoch is like the level that makes sure that the wall is straight, plummet, and which is referring to something which is on the top, on the higher part. If it's coming from the word anoch, so then why is it written without an aleph? And over there is no tov. If pasuk in Amos, anoch, there is no tov there, and here tnuch is with a tov. But we find in other words in Lashon Kodesh where sometimes it's written with a tav, sometimes without a tav, sometimes with an aleph, sometimes without an aleph. So the words toich and noich are both found in the word tanuch. Bekama tevis betanach motzinu shenesepus lasheirish hateva is aleph eitov. We find in many words in Tanakh that certain words, sometimes to the sheirish we add on the letter aleph, and sometimes we add on the letter tov. And when you add on the aleph or the tov, then it becomes a thing on its own, a description of a word of a shem dover, not just a description, but this is how it's called. As Rashi explains the word hanoch, like for example, the word tvuno, which Rashi explains means mevin dovo mitech dovo, understanding one thing from another. That's the word tvuno. So tvuno is a word that stands for an action, which is mevin dovo mitech dovo, understanding one thing from another. And due to the fact that the word tnuch has in it both perushim, toich, venoich, nimtza shekavonas hakosav ilegadro imtzoy. So because it has both words in it, both toich and noich, so it's a combination of both, and it means the gadro imtzoy. And in order to ensure that we shouldn't come to think that that is what the meaning of the word is also in der Chapshat. And why might we think that that's the meaning of Pshat? Because we might compare this to a precedent in last week's Pasha. Bifrat la'acha shalamadnu le'el, the Pirush Rashi in Pasha Shmini, where it says, Sha'anofa Hidayo Ragzonis. Rashi explains one of the birds is called Ha'anofa. Says Rashi that Ha'anofa is a Dayo Ragzonis. It's a Dayo that is an angry type of bird. Hainu Sha'anofa Benun Hu Loshin Kas V'Regis. In other words, Rashi sees in the name of this bird, Anofa, the idea of anger. Kamoi Af Loshin Regis. Like Af means anger. Rashi, in other words, acknowledges and incorporates this in his pirush that sometimes certain words in Chumash are sometimes written with an additional letter, a nun or another letter, and sometimes it's written without that letter. So in order to not make that mistake, that likewise it is over here that the word tnuch is from Lashon Teich and Lashon Noich and a combination, and that's why it's Gedra Tzoi. Therefore, so that we shouldn't think that because of Rashi, Lashon Tnuch loy neidali almenas lish le pirush kanal. So Rashi wants to negate that, and therefore he writes that the Lashon Tnuch, that I don't know. It means that the Gedra Tzoi. That Rashi agrees with, but Lashon, the Lashon of Tnuch, that is not known to me. Because what the Teras Kenim says, that doesn't work for me. That's not acceptable to me. So the question is, why not? Hatam shelekibu Rashi pirushze. The reason why Rashi doesn't accept that. Kiloshitas Rashi kashatevo pleinis nichteves pam benunu pam biladeo. When we have a word that sometimes is written with a nun and sometimes without a nun, hinal pipshute shel mikro elohed beis teves shelachol achas men pirush shema. Rashi in pshute shel mikro holds that when we have such a word, although it is the same word that sometimes is written with a nun, sometimes without a nun, but the meaning is different. It's not just random that sometimes we use it with a nun, sometimes without a nun. No, it's because the pirush of the word actually changes when it is with a nun from when it is without a nun. Yes, it shares a certain common denominator. There is similarity, and there is also similarity in the meaning, yet still the meaning of the word is different based on if it is with a nun or without a nun. How do we know that? The proof for that is like this. Alakosuv uberuach hapecha pirish Rashi hayoytze mishnei nechirim shel af. The ruach hapecha, the wind of your nose, literally, says Rashi, it is the air that comes out from the two nostrils of the nose. That the Torah speaks about Hashem's Ruach HaPecha, so to speak, although HaKadosh Baruch Hu obviously has no body, but the Torah will use terminology of a human king, kedel hashmiya oizen habriyos kefi ha'hoive sheyuchlu lehovin dover. The Torah will use such terminology, human terminology, so that we should be able to relate to it. When a person is angry, air comes out from his nostrils. And likewise in other psukim, where it says that smoke rose up in his nose. And likewise when it says that from the wind, from the air of his nose, they will cease to exist. And for that it says also in a different passage that for the sake of my name, I will be patient and delay my anger. When his anger calms down, so then his breath is longer. And when he's angry, his breath is shorter. And so on. And Rashi concludes, and likewise, anytime the term af and charoin is brought in the pasuk, in the Tanakh, this is what I will explain the meaning to be, that the Torah is just using human terminology to explain the concept. But what do we see from this Rashi? We see from this Rashi, mizem mashma, that although it is true that the word af has in it the meaning also of anger, like for example we just had in Pasha Shmini, in the word anofa, but you can only really translate af to mean that when it is written together with the word ruach or oshon or arich neshimosi ukayetz bozer. But if you just have the word af alone, then af doesn't mean anger. If it just has the word af, it means the nose. It doesn't mean anger. Therefore, Rashi is not comfortable in a pshuta shel mikra perspective to say that tnuch means toich. And likewise, Rashi can't accept in pshuta shel mikra that tnuch should mean the word noich, which is reim v'goiba, a high place. Kepirush chaymas anoch, like the meaning of the word chaymas anoch. In addition to the changing from an aleph to a tov, the word anoch doesn't mean a high place. This tool called a plummet to ensure that the wall is even, that doesn't mean roim. The word of an anoch is this tool called a tool, a plummet that ensures that the wall is level. The hainu kava mishkelis, it's a string with weight, that is used to check how smooth and even the wall is. The connection to height is only due to the fact that this tool is placed on the top of the wall. But it's not that this thing by definition means Reim v'goiva. So therefore Rashi is not comfortable with saying what the Teras Kenim says, that Tnuch is connected to Anoch, and Anoch is connected to the top of the wall, and therefore that should mean the top of the ear. That is too many steps. That's too far-fetched. Because Anoch itself doesn't really mean Goiva. And also that the letters aren't exactly the same. So therefore Rashi in Pshut Shel Mikra is not comfortable with accepting the Pirush of the Teras Kenim. So based on all the above, we can also understand the Lashon of Rashi that the Pesrim refer to it as tendrus. The local Shenu Pasha Tetzabe Shekerim tendrus. He doesn't write like he writes Pasha Tetzabe. What is called tendrus? No. He writes that the Pesrim call it tendrus. Inyan ha-Pesrim, while derech inyan Pisrin ha-Chalayim. What means Pesrim? Interpreters, like someone who knows how to interpret a dream. We find that term in Chumash, that the Sar HaMashkim of Parai saw in his dream the three branches of Pasal, Yosef, and Yosef explained to him it's referring to 3 days. Likewise, when Parai dreamt about the 7 cows, Yosef interpreted to mean 7 years. What does the word Pisrin therefore mean? That although in the dream he didn't see days, he didn't see years, Yosef, but Yosef interpreted to mean that. What means interpret? He revealed and pointed out the meaning of the dream. That it's referring to 3 days and 7 years. In other words, that the job of a pacer, what does it mean to be a pacer? To find the common denominator between 2 things which on the surface are not really similar. And therefore, so now we understand that after Rashi made already his statement, that the word, the Lashon of Tnuch, is not known, has not been known to me. In other words, what is he saying with that? Like we explained, that from a perspective of Pshut Shel Mikra, the comparison between Tnuch and the words Toich and Nuch doesn't really fit. So in that context, Rashi now continues, but the Pesrim call it tendrus. What does it mean, the Pesrim? The Pesrim are those that know how to compare things which on the surface they don't seem to be similar, but they are able to find a similarity anyways. According to their pirush, there is an explanation to the wording tnuch based on the comparison between the words tnuch to the tevas teichanuch. So these Pesrim oimrim shezel gamatam sheloshen lav shel tnuch hitendrus. Says Rashi that based on this style of Pesrim, of bringing comparisons, although they're not similar, it also explains why it's called tendrus, because tendrus also has tnuch in it. In their pronunciation, there is a similarity. A few of the letters are found in the word tendrus as well. So the comparison of the wording, that is also found in the Laz. So you might ask the very obvious question: how could it be that in the time of Rashi, a non-Lashon Kodesh word, a word of a different language, should somehow be connected to the word in Chumash and Lashon HaKodesh? But that's not a question. We actually find even more than that in Rashi's Pirush explicitly in Sefer Dvarim, Pashas Dvarim. The pasuk states that the Tzidonim call the Chermoin, the mountain in Eretz Yisrael, they call it Siryon. The Ha'amori yikru le'snir, and the Amori calls it Snir. That's what the pasuk says. Pirish Rashi, that hu Chelek b'loshen Ashkenaz b'loshen Knan, that Snir, Siryon, that is snow in German and in Knan language. Hainu sheshem Chelek b'loshen Ashkenaz b'loshen Knan bizman Rashi hoya kishmei b'fi ha'amorim sheyikru le'snir loshen b'chumash. So this is something that is brought down in Chumash, and Rashi observes that this is the root of the word is also in German and in Lashon Knan in Rashi's time. Ulahoyer gam atoni kroshelek b'loshen Ashkenaz v'chem b'safra Anglis b'dem l'teva snir, that even today snow, both in German and in English, is similar to the word snir. It's called Schnee in German, or Schnee in Yiddish, which is a dialect of German, and snow in English. So we see that Rashi has no problem with saying that certain words that we find in other languages could have evolved from a word in Chumash, in Lashon HaKodesh, and the fact that we find that similarity means that there's a connection, and that is the idea over here also. So basically, the word tendus in the time of Rashi comes from the sheirish of the word tznuch, which we find in Chumash. From the inner secrets, Kabbalistic, the Chassidus types of teachings that we find in Rashi. Kabbalah explains that the cause for negoim, for all kinds of tzoras, comes due to the removal of the oir ha-chochma. When the light of chochma is removed, then a tzoras can happen. Ki Metzora choshuv kemeis, because a Metzora, Chazal tell us, is compared to a dead person, to a dead body. And it says in Iev Yomusu v'lei b'chochma, that death is connected to a lack of chochma. So the Alter Rebbe in the Likutei Torah explains this concept that Kabbalah says, what that means in Avodas Ha'odam, in our Avodah. Moichin de imo, chinas bino, his beinenus begadlus habera, meireres ba'odam ava b'chinas rotzen. Moichin, the intellectual faculties of a person are subdivided in chochma, bina, and das. Chochma and bina are called in Kabbalah Abba and Ima, the father and the mother, because chochma is referring to the initial spark of wisdom, of understanding. When a person is trying to understand some concept, an idea, sugi in Gemara, he has difficulty with, so he thinks deeply about it. So first there's like that flash, that lightening of understanding, but it's not yet explained. He can't yet explain it properly. It's just a light bulb. It comes up, he feels there is clarity, but it's not yet tangible. So that's called chokhmah, that's Abba, who gives the seed. And then Bina, that is already the developed understanding from the spark of chokhmah, and that is called Ima. The mother, like in the mashal, develops a baby. So Chochma is called Abba, Bina is called Ima. So it says in Chassidus that Moichin de Ima Pchinas Bina is referring to his Beinenus Begadlus Habeira. When a person contemplates the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is detailed contemplation, it's not just a spark, it's really processing the understanding. That his Beinenus will awaken within a person a love for Hashem in a style that is called Rotzoi. That comes from Nevuas Yecheskel, in the Merkava, that Yecheskel Hanavi saw. It says that Malachim are Rotzoi Vashoiv. They rush forth and they settle down, come back. So it says in Chassidus that Rotzoi Vashoiv is in Avedas HaAdam as well, and also in the Malachim. The Rotzoi is the yearning to go out of oneself, to connect to Hashem and leave the confinements of the Gashmistic world. Shoiv is the coming back, the returning, the settling down due to the realization that Hashem wants us to be in this world and do Avodas Hashem in the physical realm. But the initial yearning to cleave to Hashem, to leave our confined reality and become one with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that is the Rotzoi, and that results from the Hisbeinenus, Chinas Bina, in the greatness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Lotzes mi mitziuse, velirtzes likolo belekus, to go out of his mitzias and to want to become one with Hashem. Moichin de Abba, but Chochma brings out a different point. Chochma shalamayla mi bina, it is a level of Chochma which is above Bina, and that is causing a person the opposite. Mevim lepitul betachlis lelakus. It is not what I want. It is what Hashem wants from me. The realization of the Chochma brings a person to become fully nullified before Hashem. That will result in a movement of returning, settling, coming down into the world. Not the soul expiring and leaving the body. Rather, the Kabbalah and the Bitul to do Torah and mitzvahs, learning Torah, doing mitzvahs down here in the physical world. Where does a Torah come from? It comes when there is a lack of Eir HaChochma. When a person is lacking this complete bitul of Chochma, which results in a lack of channeling the Rotzoi to the right direction. It is a positive thing that a person has this Rotzoi, this yearning to connect to Hashem and go out of his limitations. That is a positive feeling. However, it needs to be channeled correctly. The idea is that once there's a Rotzei, we should then have the Shoif following it. But if there's just Rotzei without a Shoif, it's lacking the realization that I need to bring that Rotzei into my learning Torah and into my doing mitzvahs. When there is only the Hisbeinenus of Ima, of the level of Bina, that Rotzei, that powerful yearning can allow for some nourishment for Klippa, for the opposite of Kedusha. Al derech masha mihislavus betfilo bilvad yochalo velachre zeher b'shel yeshet v'chu. Like if someone has a very excited davening and he goes to high levels of ecstasy and excitement and gadlus hakel, in middle of his davening, it can then result in the person having a very strong awareness of self. After davening, he feels that he's on the top of the world and he feels like he's a big guy. Adli Slavus built to Retsuya, sometimes that excitement can actually lead to wear off. He would utilize that excitement in negative expressions, which is very bad. So what can rectify this nega? This is called what tzaras is in Avodas Adam. So how do we rectify that? How do we fix that? A kohen fixes that. The kohen mamshich is eira chochma. A kohen is mamshich chochma, as is explained in Kabbalah, that kohen is chesed and Levi is gevura. Yisrael is tiferes. Chesed is rooted in chochma. Gevura is rooted in bina. So kohen, who is called the isha chesed, comes from chochma. So kohen is mamshich the eira chochma. And from that comes the fixing the tara of the negoim. It pushes away that nourishment of the outer forces, of the negative forces, klipon, sitra achra, which is the opposite of kedusha. As is explained at length in Chassidus. Now there are two parts in the process of the tara from the kohen, through the kohen. First, there is vahuva lakohen. It should be brought, the tzaras or the Metzora should be brought to the kohen. And then there is v'yotza kohen mechutz lamachane. The Metzora has to go outside of the camp, and the kohen has to go out to the Metzora. Kedei letakenes inan hanegoim ein dai b'amshachas eira chochma kesher le'atzmo v'yotza kohen mechulu. It is not sufficient that the kohen should just draw down and bring down this eira chochma, and that automatically will take care of it. That's not enough. It is needed, and this is needed really as a prerequisite beforehand. The first has to be the stage of Vehuva Lakoim, which means Hatikun b'mkeim hanegoim. The tikkun cannot be superimposed, that the kohen just reveals Chachma and that's it. In the place of the nega, in the place where the Metzora is, in the level of Bina, we have to be metaken and rechannel the Rotze to the right place. The tikkun has to be in the Rotze b'kleis hanefesh shebo mitzad meichem de'imo Bina. That strong, passionate desire to leave the confinement, that in itself, in that place, we need to fix it. Kedei sheyas'imu le'inen hashev. That Rotze should be linked and should be fitting with the shev. Once we have fixed the Rotze and reframed what the Rotze is meant to do, then can happen the second stage of the kohen bringing on the Eira Chochma, which is the Amshachas Eira Chochma, making the Ima Hamevatelis of Sharius Hanegoyim. Once we bring then in the Eira Chochma, that will prevent the future from there ever being again a situation of a nega, that in the future when he'll have a Rotze, it will not ever be again in the wrong style. It will always be fitting with the Shaiv. But first we have to fix the place where it already has happened that the Rotze was in the wrong manner. And both of these parts of the Tara process are alluded to in Rashi here. The kohen has to put it on the Tnuch Eisen. That is referring to the Hamshacha of the Eira Chochme. The kohen gives. What does he give? He gives Chochme. That's on the Eisen, Shmiya v'Isbeinenus. In the Meichin of Ima, in the Eisen is Shmiya, hearing. Hearing is understanding, because Chochma is seeing and Bina is hearing. Because when you see something, you see in one flash the entire picture. Shmiel, you have to hear slowly, you hear more and more, and you get more and more of an understanding that is comparable to Bina. So Nosan, HaKoyen, the Koyen gives Chachma, but we're on the Tnuch Eisen, on the Bina. And Rashi writes that this Lashon Tnuch has not become known to me, which means that the Hatare Vatikum Betnuch Eisen B'Meichen De'ima Loy Noida. That this process is something that is loy noida, which means this is not something that happens by default just by bringing down the amshacha from Meichen the Abba. V'nokad Rashi lashon loy noida, and Rashi refers loy noida. He doesn't say loy yodaiti because he's talking about lashon nifa, something that happens by default as a passive. An automatic thing that happens by default. Rashi doesn't say, I don't know. He says, this is not something that happens by default, by being mamshich derachachma. Because you need first to be metaken the blemish that happened in Bina, in the Meichen De'ima, the Bina Atzma. Just like we know in the concept of tshuva, that tshuva has to be in the same place, in the same setting where the sin happened the first time, and the person is again in the same setting and refrains from sinning. That is proper tshuva, as the Rambam explains. So similarly, in the concept over here, that the tikkun has to be in the mokim habgam in bina. And Rashi alludes to this tikkun in the place of bina by saying the poisrim. What is poisrim? Toichnal derech hanal bepisn chalemes sheyeshnom bezin yanim hanirim mechitzenius geshenim zemizeh. That when we have, what is a pisrim, like we explained before about the interpreters of dreams, that there are two things which on the surface seem to be very different from each other. And the pisrin is the revealing, that underlying theme that somehow brings the two concepts together. What does it mean in Aveda in our situation? We have to be poiser the hisbeinenus of Bina. As haislavus va'arotze haboimin habina. We are faced with a situation where Bina brings about this excitement and this yearning to leave the confinements of the body. That comes from Bina. That rotzei should be the way it should be based on the kavanah pnimis, the inner intention of the rotzei. And afterwards, and then that erachachma can then be brought down onto the tnuch. Then you can bring down from chachma not only on the bina level, on the tnuch, but you can also bring it down to the thumb of the hand and the big toe, which is symbolizing the kiyum hamitzvos b'maisa b'yadu b'regel. That's already not the midas and the avos Hashem that come from chachma and bina, from these beinunus, but the hand and the feet symbolize the actual deed. And then the whole concept of negoim will totally be bottled, and the kain will be mechaper, and the Metzora becomes toil.